Let's give a huge Lime Room round of applause for Mr. Robert Blake.
Good afternoon, Podfest. How are you guys doing today?
Awesome.
That's the right answer. Awesome. That's what I like to hear. So my name is Roberto Blake, and hopefully I'll be helping you create something awesome today. I am a YouTuber. I am a creative entrepreneur. I am the host of the Create Something Awesome Today podcast, as you heard in the intro, and I'm also the founder of AwesomeCreatorAcademy.com, which is an online platform to help educate and motivate creative entrepreneurs. So today we're going to be covering my podcaster's guide to YouTube. Is there anyone here who's actually on YouTube right now? Oh wow, that's actually quite a few of you. Is there any of you who might have your podcast on YouTube right now? Okay, still a few of you. That is fantastic. Anybody here super excited about the prospect of putting their podcast on YouTube? All right, so I need you guys, if you're really excited about this, then I need you to clap it up. That's what I like to hear. So there are a lot of opportunities on YouTube, and YouTube is a very different platform and format from podcasting because it is video first and audio second, even though every great YouTuber will tell you that you have to get audio right, something that you guys will be able to do in spades as podcasters. So you're over that first hurdle of creating a good experience. But the beauty of podcasting is the fact that, you know what? You could, wear a wrinkled shirt, you could have your hair and makeup not be right, and you can still create a quality podcast. Can't necessarily pull that off on YouTube unless you have the greatest personality of all time. That being said, I need you guys to start to think about YouTube not as a way to repurpose your podcast, but as the evolution of your podcast and taking it to another level and give you another place for distribution, awareness, building your brand, reaching a completely new audience, and also exponentially growing your revenue with new monetization streams. The thing that I think a lot of you are really excited about. So, a little bit of context on me. I am a YouTube certified expert. I am someone who's been doing YouTube more or less at least weekly since July of 2013, which is kind of my personal prerequisite for calling yourself a YouTuber. Consistent content. There are a few genres where there's an exception if you're a filmmaker or animator, but some level of consistency, I think, is necessary in a platform like YouTube, and it's very demanding. In the time since July of 2013, I've produced over 1,000 videos on YouTube, but I've also played with all the other live streaming platforms and I've done over 1,000 live streams. So it's safe to say that I'm kind of a video first type of guy. With that said, it's given me tremendous opportunities to work with brands, to educate and motivate my audience. I've grown that audience to over 290,000 subscribers starting from zero in that time period around creative entrepreneurship and education. And I also decided that a lot of my audience loved podcasts, and they also sometimes didn't have the disposable time to lean in and watch a video. It'd be great if I could have an experience where I can create value for them when they are in the car or on a commute or on a flight, or even when they're working out, or when they're doing any number of things that are less demanding for their attention and their active time. Podcasting is wonderful because it's this great passive audio experience that we can't really get from articles or videos, and that's where you guys win. But there's another opportunity in terms of depth because video is the next best thing to being there in person. And that's why it was so important to me to produce these 1,000 pieces of video, is because I could take information I had and I could reach new people who are searching intentionally in YouTube. Anybody here familiar with the fact that Google owns YouTube? You get to own the problems in your niche in both Google and YouTube if you're making YouTube content, and it's fantastic. It's the second largest search engine in the world. So that was important to me because if I'm doing something I can teach and educate people in person like I'm doing here with you guys today, what if I could scale that by reaching people who are looking for a specific solution, not looking for me, they're not really interested in me, not just yet, I haven't won them over yet. But if they are interested in solving a specific problem that I'm capable of helping them with, then they might have context on me, they might care about me. And I've done that literally over 1,000 times, and it continues to bring in revenue, new leads for my business, and it continues to scale brand awareness around me while giving me multiple active and passive income streams that come from that. And if you have a podcast already, you already are familiar with the opportunities, this is just an opportunity to double down and grow. So, with that said, let's talk about what we're going to learn in today's session. Today, I'm going to be helping you understand the context of the YouTube platform, and we've already covered a little bit of how it might differ from what you're used to in podcasting, but I'm going to go into some specifics. We're going to really qualify what quality content is finally, indisputably in a very practical way, because how many of you here have heard over and over again, all you have to do on YouTube is make quality content? Now, who's actually ever given you a real answer for what quality is?
No one.
Exactly. We're gonna fix that. I'm gonna get into the equipment that you need to do a video podcast, but I'm going to actually really quick take a shortcut on that. Everybody here needs to know. In fact, let me do a quick poll of the audience. How many of you produce podcast content that goes over 20 minutes? Show of hands. The far majority of you. Let me save you some time on your shopping list. Go ahead and get the Panasonic Lumix GH5. The Panasonic GH5 has the following benefits for a long-form podcast that is going to be in video format. It does not overheat after being on for 20 minutes, even if you do 4K video, which it can do. It has an adapter that you can buy for $400 that will allow you to put 2 XLR microphones with adjustments for gain and levels directly into the camera and get that clean audio that you're used to without a lot of trouble. It also can shoot content with an indefinite time limit. Anyone here who's used a DSLR knows that you have a 20 to 30 minute time limit on many of the other cameras, Sony, Canon, Nikon, unless you buy some fancy $700, maybe $300 if you know what you're looking for, accessory to fix that problem. Well, the Panasonic just lets you film indefinitely. And it has a flip out touchscreen so you can see what's going on, which a lot of the more advanced cameras in that price range still don't do, unfortunately. So this is why it's an extremely practical camera for you to buy. So if you need to do a long form interview style podcast and you're doing it on location, or you want to film yourself directly in front of your microphone for over an hour, this is what you need. It has 2 SD card slots, and it can also go ahead and you can either have that back up a copy, or if you need to go over the time limit of your SD card space, you can go on to the second one and your video files are fine. So we're shortcutting. I'm going to tell you all the equipment you need, but if you have no curiosity beyond that about what should I buy, Roberto, if you need a definitive answer, just buy the Panasonic GH5. Hashtag this talk not sponsored by Panasonic in any way. So we're going to cover that. We're going to cover some approaches to video podcasting in terms of formats and things that you can do. And then I'm going to give you some examples of some very powerful video podcasts on YouTube, including some people who are just starting out, so that you don't just see the megastars and the thing that feels out of reach. You'll see how some people are coming to the platform and are crushing it pretty much right out the gate, and how you can too. I actually know a lot of these people personally, so I'll be able to give you context. We'll talk a little bit about the YouTube algorithm, and for you guys, it's actually going to help you more than it's going to hurt, unlike so many other people. And then we're going to get into your monetization options, and then my quote-unquote secret recommended strategy for doing all of this. And then we'll do a little bit of Q&A. So, does that sound good to everybody?
Yep. Yeah.
All right, so let's get going. Context of platform. Every platform, whether it's social media, whether it's going from written to audio to video, all these different platforms, all these different mediums have their own culture, quirks, and their own level of investment. How many of you got into podcasts because you knew for a fact that financially you could get started and produce something of quality with a low level of financial investment? Show of hands. Far majority of you. Exactly. There is a different threshold of investment when it comes to producing video, because now, in addition to all the money you spent on audio, you have to spend probably equal to that on lighting equipment and on the actual video production equipment itself in terms of cameras and lenses. So you have to basically look at 3 to 5 times the investment when it comes from transitioning from audio to video. That is a difference in the context of the platform. And then there's also the difference in the software. Quirks and features. Now, a lot of you, it's very straightforward to just do media and web hosting for your podcast, and then the syndication is pretty much a snap. Most of it's through iTunes, and almost everyone's an aggregate of iTunes anyway, and you can do simple RSS stuff, so it's not that complicated. However, when you're going to a video platform like YouTube, there are its own quirks and features that you have to deal with. Some of them are very similar to what you have to do for a podcast. You have to use tags and titles and descriptions just like you would for your podcast. So at least that's similar. But something else that's new that you may not have had wherever else you're syndicating your podcast is that you have the YouTube analytics, which will be very favorable for a lot of you, but you also have the comment section of YouTube, or as many of us affectionately refer to it, flaming dumpster fire number 6. So there is that aspect of it in terms of quirks and also the culture. The culture of a video platform is very different than the passive form that you have in the form of audio. A lot of you wish that more of your audience would rate and review and tell you what they think on your podcast on iTunes, right? Yeah. You're gonna have the opposite problem in the YouTube comment section. And so you'll get used to those things. Also, you'll find that the engagement, a lot of it is close to real time, the feedback is there. You'll also find that you'll have to navigate new tools. So just respect that it's a different platform, and don't think of this again as repurposing or redistributing your current existing thing. One of the things I would caution you against doing is taking audio-only podcast and then just uploading that to YouTube. There could be a benefit, I know, to some of you thinking, well, if I start doing video now, what about my old archive and what about giving them that context? Believe it or not, you could just start fresh, even with like 100, 200 episodes in, and just start, and then let them know that if they want to see if they want to get to the archive, that they have to go to the audio podcast, and that can be some new traffic for you from a new audience. So it could be beneficial in that way. So don't think of it as a downside. Look at the opportunity that you have with starting fresh. And so I wouldn't worry about that too much, because if you aren't meeting expectations that people have in a video platform, it could go very badly. So when you upload that, that's a problem. Now here is a very advanced hack if you absolutely want to take advantage of your own old archive. Is anyone here familiar with a program called Adobe After Effects? A few of you. For those of you who are not, Adobe After Effects is an animation program that Adobe has in their software suite, the Creative Cloud, and they have a new product that aligns with that called the Adobe Character Animator. If you already are profitable on your podcast and you want to repurpose an audio inventory, there's a clever trick that you could do. You could hire an After Effects specialist that can make these animated character puppets. And you could literally have a talking head puppet that can roll its eyes, open its mouth, and it will lip sync exactly to your existing audio content. And so you could have this repurpose your existing audio content as an animated podcast if you were doing audio only and wanted to come to YouTube. This will not be cheap. It will not be wildly expensive. It will be somewhere in between, and you'll have to hire someone good. But it is something that is unique and that very few people are taking advantage of. And even if more people do it, it still will be a novelty because it will not be the majority of people. And it could make you stand out, and it could add something interesting and visually dynamic to your existing branding. So if you wanted to go that route, that is the more practical way to do it without seeming like you're being quote unquote lazy, or you're just going for low hanging fruit. This is a way to do it in a very polished and nuanced way that creates some interesting value and gives people the option of, I'll just listen only, or okay, I still like the quirky animated character here and I can just sit down and enjoy this, or not. It just means that you're still meeting a reasonable standard of quality in terms of a video presence and the expectation of, I clicked on a video. If I wanted audio only, I would have went to an audio only platform, etc. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're talking about context of platform. Context always matters, and I think that podcasters, especially those of you who cover news topics, can really appreciate how much context matters. So YouTube is a video platform first. It is a video platform first, but it's not a video platform only. It is video, it is audio, but it's also engagement, and then it also can become and evolve into a dialogue with regard to how you interact with people in your comments. So when you are doing YouTube, you can't prioritize the audio experience in the same way that you have previously. You'll find that what you may not even be satisfying to you from an audio experience standpoint as a podcaster is exponentially better than any audio experience a YouTube viewer has ever had. So you don't have to be a perfectionist in the same way when it comes to your audio on YouTube, but you do have to meet a minimum threshold of acceptable quality on video, and you don't have to have a polished video to the same extent that you do the polished audio. Audio is still very important in YouTube. It is probably even more important to the overall experience of getting through the content. You know, people really don't want to watch a video that makes their ears bleed. They're really not into it, but it doesn't have to be perfect. The video itself doesn't even have to be perfect, but it still has to be good enough, and we're going to get into what that means. Now, I also want to pivot real quickly. I want you to understand that in the past, you've based the success on your podcast on downloads, correct?
Yeah.
Someone tell me what they think. Like, you know, someone volunteer to give me this answer and I'll pick someone. What do you guys think is the number of downloads for a successful or good podcast? Some volunteers, raise your hands and I'll pick your answers. Gentlemen in the back. 500. 500 downloads is a quality podcast. All right, that's a good number. Anybody else? 500, going once, going twice? Okay, so 500 downloads is a quality podcast. That's a successful podcast. I agree with that number. I think that's a solid number. I would even say conservatively that maybe 200 downloads, 100 downloads of an episode is a solid episode. That's a lot of people opting to say yes and please and thank you. Views, or rather listens in terms of a podcast, usually are exponentially more than what the downloads are anyway, because most people consume the episode and move on. That being said, YouTube success shouldn't be measured in the top line metric of views or subscriptions in terms of your subscriber count. It really shouldn't. It's more important that YouTube facilitate whatever your business objective is, or whatever the personal goal you set for this channel actually is, outside of those numbers. What do I mean by that? If there's a financial revenue driver behind you starting a YouTube channel, meeting that is probably the success measurement you should use. I know YouTubers who have 1 million to 500,000 subscribers that can't make a living on YouTube, and I know YouTubers with 10,000 subscribers that can. So it makes a real difference. You can't judge the quality of a YouTube channel purely on how many views or how many subscribers it has. And revenue is not the only important thing. There might be a small niche that's underserved in YouTube, especially you as podcasters might have something that's very niche specific, but it's an underrepresented thing in YouTube because people can't get the big numbers of views that they want or the big subscriber audience that they want. But those people, whether they're 500 or 5,000 people that care about this very specific thing, still matter. They're still important. They should still be served. And so I think as podcasters, you really can appreciate that every single one of those people every one of those numbers is an actual person on the other end, because with you guys speaking directly to your audience rather than performing for them on camera, the intimacy that you interpret with regard to your audience is probably deeper than most YouTubers when they're starting out actually appreciate. So I want you to philosophically embrace this idea that you don't have to be big on YouTube to be successful on YouTube, because as podcasters, you know that a small but loyal audience can be more than enough to make an impact and make a difference, and that each one of those people actually matters, and that they could make a big difference in terms of revenue for you, because in the same way that one loyal listener could then convert to a client, it's the same in YouTube. One view could be the right view. One view might be a producer at a news network or at Conan or Ellen. One view might be the client that writes a $10,000 check. One view might be the person who decides to bring you to a speaking engagement at a conference that makes a difference in your career. So just understand that it's more than the views. I know it's easy to get caught up in the hype of the views and the subscribers. Don't do it. Objective quality. Objective quality is the thing that a lot of people initially focus on, and they should. It's not the only measure of quality, but it's important for us to talk about it because this is the starting point, and this is the thing that you can actually control. Quality in itself is somewhat in the eye of the beholder, but there are objective, measurable things when it comes to quality. As podcasters, you know this in the form of audio. You know that a lack of background noise, ambient noise, interference, having the right decibel levels, doing appropriate levels of noise reduction and it not being overly produced, not having, like processing the right amount of room tone and reverb, all of these things is like, this sounds familiar, right? That is objective quality when it comes to the production of your podcast, and in YouTube, it is objective quality in the form of the audio quality. With video, it's very similar. Is this lit very well? Does this have grain and noise? Is it distracting? Does every dark area of the video look like it has snowflakes on it because of the fact that it's not, set up for low light situations? Is the main subject in focus and tack sharp? Is the background distracting or disorganized or just a mess? Is the editing quality consistent? Is it appropriate? Did they edit out the mistakes that they needed to? Or is this overproduced and over-edited, and is it hard to watch? These things are objective measures of the quality of your video content that are obvious to anybody and impact the experience, because again, it's about what we're seeing. Does this represent the video well? Is it hard to watch? It's very hard to watch a blurry video and get any satisfaction from it. It's very hard to watch an unstable video that's shaking everywhere and everything like that. It's like, I think I can give Cloverfield a pass, but some people disagree. Shaky cam's not fun, unless it is. And then in terms of the aesthetic value of the video, in terms of how nice it looks, how thoughtful every individual set piece was, so on and so forth. Or if you're doing green screen, was this well done? Or is it, something that is like a little choppy or looks amateurish? These things all are things you're going to be judged on. And then of course, whether the audio makes anyone's ears bleed or not. So, objective quality. Now, a minute ago, I talked about podcasting equipment for video. This is your short list, and it's pretty robust. And can most of you see that, or am I in the way, or what's going on? All right. Now, I'm gonna make sure I get you guys these slides, and I'm gonna run through it here in audio for you as well. So I would recommend 1 to 3 DSLR style cameras. Jared Polin tends to use 3 DSLR style cameras plus 1 or 2 GoPros, maybe 4 cameras now for his YouTube podcast, Raw Talk, which he's been doing for 8 years as a video podcast, which is extremely impressive. I'm always impressed with what Jared's doing as a creative entrepreneur. And so his whole brand is Fro Knows Photo. Anyone here familiar with Fro Knows Photo? Anyone ever listen to the Raw Talk podcast? It's a photography podcast. It's really cool. And I dig the fact that he's been upping his game for 8 years straight. That's hard to do in anything, right? So the reason for so many cameras, and this just depends on how many subjects you're gonna have, is if you're doing a one-on-one interview style podcast, you could get away with like 1 DSLR camera, and then maybe if you have someone hand-holding a smaller camera to do the wide angle, or you set up a GoPro, you could do that. My preference would be for you, ideally, to have 1 camera on yourself, 1 camera on your interview subject, and then 1 camera for safety that has the wide angle of both of you. And so that is what I think is the most practical thing to do if you can do that and if you can invest in that. You don't have to start there. If you're doing a solo podcast, you could literally just have 1 camera, and it could just be a regular DSLR style camera. Again, I prefer the Panasonic GH5, which is sitting in the corner over there, because unlimited record time. So that's a factor in long form content. Otherwise, you would have to have an assistant resetting the camera every 20 to 30 minutes. So that's why I recommend using that particular type of camera, and that's why I also think having the multiple angles makes sense, because then you can have that cut from you to your interviewee based on the timing and based on what the questions are, things of that nature. And again, you have the wide angle to show you both in context. A webcam is great in general for live to tape, or if you're doing remote interview podcast, then that's practical. And you can use either Skype with the Ecamm plugin, or my preference, Zoom.us, which has a lot of great features, hashtag not sponsored by Zoom. But I think that is extraordinarily practical. It works out really well. I find it to be more stable and reliable than Skype on a regular basis personally, and I love that it has the recording feature already built in, and I love that you can have, without any other plugins or any problems, multiple people on the call. So that's why I kind of prefer it. You also should consider having not only XLR mics, but USB mics for this, just because depending on what you might want to do, there's so many formats you could use for doing your podcast. And let's say you're traveling you're on the road, it might be really practical to have a simpler setup sometimes. So, or if you're doing the interview style podcast from the webcam, maybe the USB microphone just is more practical in your situation than the XLR. So I like having both options. You can go either way. Mixing boards, I think we all know how valuable those can be with adjusting noise and gain and getting all the levels right. Monitor headphones, my favorite are Sennheiser. A lot of people have their preference. I think that Audio-Technica does a great job as well. Just never use Beats by Dre. So I think that you guys pretty much probably know about the audio components of this, but in the context of video, I prefer to run the audio directly into my camera instead of syncing in post with a clap or relying on the software to get it right. I prefer to have a direct line into my camera for at least the main audio source and then maybe have something else as a backup. This is where XLR microphones with good 0.35 millimeter jack converters come in, and this is where I like Sennheiser and products like that, and Rode as well. They do a good job. So I would recommend maybe going that route. And if you are using the Panasonic GH5, keep in mind, it does have its own accessory that takes 2 native XLR inputs. So as a portable Micro Four Thirds style camera with a flip out screen and a touch screen, just adding that other, like $400 accessory and just plugging your existing podcast microphones into it, that could save you a lot of time and trouble, and you'll just want to make sure it's compatible with your current setup. So of course there's that. And then all of you know about your boom stands, your pop filters and things of that nature and those accessories, so I didn't really put it in here. If you're doing a live to tape podcast and you want to use a DSLR style camera instead of a webcam, you'll need a video capture card. Blackmagic Shuttle Intensity is the one I typically use in those situations. You could also use one that is popular with video game players, the Elgato Game Capture. That works out really well. As a backup audio source, when you have multiple cameras, don't be afraid to use a shotgun microphone. And for those of you who are doing short form podcasts that are 10 or 15 minutes, anybody here doing like a 15-minute or less podcast? All right, so for a lot of you, you could use the traditional YouTube setup, and you could use a shotgun microphone like the Sennheiser MK600 or the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus. About roughly the same price, or even the Sennheiser MKE 440. You could use those as shotgun microphones, and you could go ahead and just set up the single camera, film a talking head style video direct to tape, and you could actually repurpose that as a podcast and have it as a straightforward traditional YouTube video. So that is an option, and also if you wanted to, you could use a remote lavalier mic in that situation. You could make a traditional style YouTube video if you already have the camera gear, and then you could repurpose that in a short form podcast without a tremendous amount of effort. So that is another option available to you. And of course, having a digital audio recorder as another backup source for your audio for redundancy, wildly practical, especially if this is a once in a lifetime interview and you're invested in this. Finally, last thing, large capacity SD cards. Large capacity SD cards. 128 gigs, I am not even joking, 128 gigs. If you are doing an hour-long interview or presentation, it will eat an entire 64 gig card, and you better hope that you don't go over. It will be done. So I would recommend 128 gig SD cards as a bare minimum for long-form content, and I think it's extraordinarily important to always give yourself that safety room. If you're ambitious and you also just want as much safety as possible, make the extra investment and get a 256 gig card. It seems like overkill, but it's not. Your audio files do not compare in size to these video files, and you probably at some point will want some large form storage for your archives, like a NAS system. I recently had Synology send me a 64 terabyte archive NAS system for all of my multimedia, and I will have some videos coming out specifically about this setup, but it was something that I think I really needed if I'm going to make sure that I don't lose all this valuable content forever, and it's expandable and I will need more of it. Quality comes down to the experience the video creates. All this equipment that we're investing in is to eliminate distractions and to improve the quality of the video from an experience standpoint, because again, something that is like dark and noisy is not a good video to watch. Something that's not well lit is not a good video to watch. Something that has horrible, god-awful audio is not a good video experience, right? So that matters. But it's only half of the equation, and it's the most controllable one, so that's why I spent so much time and I lead with it, because it's the thing that you can absolutely get better at over time very quickly, or that you could just throw money at, or that you could throw outsourcing at. So, wildly practical. Subjective quality. This is painful. Subjective quality. No matter how hard you try, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, quality is in the eye of the beholder. There's gonna be somebody who doesn't like it no matter how hard you work on it. Anybody familiar with that? Anybody have that? Anybody have a favorite troll or heckler in their community? Yeah. So, what do we do about subjective quality? Well, with video, on-camera presence, not unlike being a public speaker, on-camera presence, confidence, charisma, all of those things matter. You also have to think about tailoring your appearance. One tip I will give you is that when you are going on video, go ahead and pick clothes that you're happiest in and they're most comfortable in, that make you feel confident, make you feel good, but are also super low maintenance. Because if you decide to go too far in your appearance and then you ever have to step it down in the case of an emergency to meet your deadlines or do anything, your audience will notice and they will be very vocal about it, especially the trolls. So set yourself up for something sustainable. One tip that I will give anyone and everyone is that it's not an accident that Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, people of that nature wear the same thing every day, day in and day out. It's very easy, it eliminates the amount of stress and decisions, but in terms of video, it's very practical for a continuity standpoint. I understand that also for female creators it's a little different and harder because of how you're judged on your appearance, mostly by your own peers, but I do have practical hacks and tips for that in terms of if you find an aesthetic and make something still feel very uniform, uniforms are always respected. So if you make it a part of the brand and you make it part of the uniform, or monetarily, you make it your merchandise, well then you have a very practical reason for showing up in the same thing every day, because then you're plugging your own product and also again your uniform, your continuity, your brand. So you could go there, and that's a very important thing that you could do, especially if you have to do a lot of this back to back for batch processing reasons, because as many of you batch process, anyone here batch process, batch record their podcast, they do a lot of it back to back? Good, that's how you keep up with the demand, right? Same thing with YouTube, and because of all the extra variables of lighting and video, the best thing to do is to sit down and record as much as you can, as much as you can at a high peak of energy, and that's going to be important because maintaining that energy, that on-camera presence, that stamina, that lightheartedness, that's going to carry through the videos. So put yourself in a position to where the format and also to where what you have to do on a regular basis to produce this content has the lowest level of energy and intensity in terms of investment for you in a sustainable way. Make it to where this will not be devastating, soul crushing, draining to do back to back twice or to do it a couple of days in a row. Because if you're going that far, it will feel like a chore, it'll be unsustainable and you won't want to do it. Also, your audience will see the fatigue, they will. You don't have to worry about that right now if you're doing an audio only podcast, and there are ways for you to cover it, but it's very difficult to make those things up in video. So be aware of that. Subjective quality has three main components from my point of view. Is this interesting to me as an individual viewer? It's, do I care about this? Am I a Game of Thrones fan or am I not? That's very binary, okay? So you have to make sure that you're doing things that have people's interest. Is it relevant to them now? Do they really care about this particular thing in a meaningful way for them beyond the, oh yeah, I opt in, I'm part of that crowd. That's just interest, that's surface level. Now bring it home to, okay, but what about me specifically? Do I specifically care about this one-to-one? And then, are you keeping me engaged? Are you just dragging on? Am I excited? Do I get your jokes? Do I resonate with you as an individual? Those things all matter, and that's why subjective quality is so hard to get right, and you won't get it right with everybody, and that's okay. So just keep in mind that all those things matter. This matters in podcasting, it matters in video, it matters in any type of content that you do, even the written word, even public speaking. All of it matters. So it's the thing that's very hard to get right, but it's the most important thing. You can control all the technical aspects really easy. This is harder. And like I said, this is pretty much your short list that you have to think about when it comes to video podcasting. You have to think about your facial expressions. You have to think about the aesthetics of the background and the setup. You also have to think about those things with your guest and whether they're awkward or whether you've made them comfortable, especially how they're going to be physically represented here. You have to maintain energy throughout. You have to think about the camera positioning and angles and whether they're flattering to you and your body type. You have to think of all of those things. You have to think about what the coverage is in terms of the background, and it's something that, again, the logistics of this could feel overwhelming or intimidating, but I think that for the most part, it comes down to, are you super excited about making this video, and is the person you're making with, if you're interviewing them, are they super excited, and did you keep your room clean today? And I think if you manage just that much, you're probably fine. So don't get intimidated by this or overwhelmed by this list. And again, I'll make some content around this both in written, audio, and video for you guys because I believe in read, watch, look, listen. I'll probably outsource to one of my freelancers to do an infographic around it. And so this will be available, by the way, on my LinkedIn profile. I make sure I put all my presentations up on LinkedIn so you can connect with me there. Also, I'm going to get this for them to distribute for you guys via the email list. So just look forward to that and know that this isn't going away, and you will get this information, and I'll also recirculate this information in other formats. But I do think that these things are important for you, especially if you haven't done video on a regular basis, just in general. Video pods, easy, medium, and hard mode. And I'm gonna try to get through some of this real quickly because I see that we have time running up. But live to tape. As I said earlier, you could do these things either live to tape. If you do it in YouTube and you have YouTube Live enabled for live streaming, if you have 1,000 or more subscribers, you have something called YouTube Super Chat, which means that people can actually donate to you live in real time. So even if you're making mistakes, you're getting paid to make your mistakes and do the raw version of your podcast, knowing the polished, edited audio will come out later on the back end. So you could literally make money during the production stage of your podcast episode if you have the courage to do it live with an audience the way that you might do with a live radio show or something of that nature, and take advantage of the platform that way. I've known people to have anything from $100 to $2,000 days doing super chats, and I think that it can be very practical if you have a very passionate, loyal audience, even if it's a small one, because again, the smallest number of people will be the people who throw money. So there's that. Edited video pods. I talked about this earlier, how you could do a traditional 15, 20 minute or less YouTube video and repurpose it as a podcast as long as the audio is amazing. And it is a very straightforward way to go. And again, I consider this the medium level because it's still more challenging than doing audio only. It's still more challenging than just doing live to tape because you have to edit afterward. So I would keep that in mind. And then we have produced. This is where you're building out your set, your studio, or you have a dedicated office space that you rented and you have 2 or 3 cameras and all the lights. This is the big show. And again, it's the highest level of investment. It's the thing that's hard to do. And I have examples of this. So let's start with somebody who is starting out a new podcast on YouTube and doing it right. This is my friend Sarah Dici. She has 300,000 subscribers in YouTube, so she recently surpassed me by about 10,000, so yay. But she started a new podcast recently, and her new podcast, The Creative Exchange, is a video podcast that also distributes and syndicates in the regular audio platforms. Now, she uses the Panasonic GH5 just like I talked about in the same camera that I use, and it's a long form podcast, usually about maybe 30 minutes, sometimes longer. She launched it a week ago, 35,000 views with no subscribers, grew the audience of subscribers, and now this video is only a day old and has another 4,000. And all of this is evergreen content, and it will only get more and more traction. And because of her previous YouTube experience, she has a lot of guests that have an audience and following of their own that can redistribute this. So she's someone who is a YouTube filmmaker who used those skills and applied it to do this video podcast and is doing it in terms of doing that slightly more produced. It's probably the bottom threshold of that high, hard level that I talked about, but keep in mind she already was a master of video. So walking backwards from that to acceptable audio and a good format wasn't difficult. If you want a really expensive version of this and you want to see a rock star, you gotta look at Ethan and Gila Klein from the H3 podcast. They already have a very popular YouTube channel with millions of subscribers, and they get a lot of special guests outside of YouTube and within the YouTube community, but they get millions of views on this podcast, and they do about maybe 5 or 6 sponsor plugs per video. And again, they can charge a lot more because they're getting millions of views on videos as well as a lot of downloads on the audio version of the podcast. They also sometimes do their podcast live to tape in Twitch, but they've also employed a staff and built a dedicated studio for this. So that's the very high end, but for the ambitious or those who have the money to invest, that's probably the gold standard. We have my friend Craig Adams. Craig does a lot of different formats in YouTube. He's done live to tape for his podcast, and he's an example of someone who has just recently decided to launch a dedicated YouTube channel for his podcast instead of having it on his main YouTube channel. And something that he does that's interesting is he goes directly to the location of his guest, and that's how they film. And so he is about 20-something episodes into this, but there's only 3 on this new channel. And he's still got traction considering that has a very small subscriber base. They are watching and it is growing, and he also still has the audio that's getting an audience that will bring people over and vice versa. Sunny Larduzzi is doing that medium form level of video, and she recently launched her podcast just the other day with podcasting legend Pat Flynn. Anybody here familiar with Pat? So that was her first episode. Pat did a remote video collab with her, filmed something for her episode. She did the intro and the outro, and all of a sudden that was a medium form video that they were able to do and still have great audio and push it out as an episode of an audio podcast while still having it fit the traditional format of a YouTube video. And that's Sunny Larduzzi. Lewis Howes, I think we all know the School of Greatness podcast. That's another example of a highly produced podcast done in an office with the appropriate cameras and videos and lighting and so on. And I would still say that this is maybe a lower level of the high end. And I still think it's attainable for the far majority of you to do something as long as you have the charisma to carry it on the level of the School of Greatness with an investment of maybe $2,000 to $3,000 worth of equipment. So I think that's practical. The YouTube algorithm, upload frequency. Podcasts are something that are a challenge to produce anyway on a weekly basis, but with regard to video, it's even more taxing. What I will say about that with the YouTube algorithm is if you're doing a long form podcast, chop up some of those videos into smaller segments that are 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and release those as clips from the podcast and as highlight reels, and then you can increase your frequency in YouTube. This also increases the amount of ad revenue that you can get for views, and maybe even the opportunity for specific sponsored videos because you have more inventory to sell. When you do a video podcast, you have inventory for the video and for the audio. You'd probably never do highlights and clips of the audio and syndicate them. But you could do that with the videos. And by doing that, you now have something that's very special and unique for that video audience, and you have short form content that people could use as a stepping stone to engage with your longer form content and invest in it. You also have another way to promote your audio podcast to people who just may not be familiar with your podcast or invested in long form content yet. They have a small, short, 5-15 minute video that could dip their toe into this and decide whether they like you and they want to commit. But again, you have more monetization opportunities because more affiliate links, more links for your own products and services, and you have all of those things. And you have more things that you can sell to sponsors in terms of inventory. So the YouTube algorithm favors watch time, which is in your favor because you do long form content, but also favors frequency of uploads, having a big show that you can cut up into smaller ones, all to your benefit. And YouTube actually pushes and promotes your video content and looks for more people to view it based on that watch time and based on their viewing patterns. And there are people in the YouTube community who share and collaborate and do things. So again, you have a lot to benefit from the YouTube algorithm. A lot of new YouTubers hate the YouTube algorithm, but podcasters have a disproportionate advantage here because of their long form content versus traditional shorter form videos and the fact that you can cut up your stuff into clips. Monetization options. I just talked about selling more of the inventory. You can exponentially increase your current sponsor rates because you added lighting and video production, so you can just charge more because it's harder to produce. But you also have the option of giving them packages for audio and video and more inventory to sell. You just doubled your inventory. If you had a clip show, you might have just quadrupled your inventory or 10x your inventory of places that you can promote and sell against. But you also have ad revenue from YouTube, and if you're doing live videos or live to tape ever, you could even do a live Q&A without it being an episode of the podcast, or you could do a special call-in show with the YouTube live stuff. And all of a sudden, you have all these additional multiple revenue streams. So it's not out of the ordinary for you to double, triple, or even 10x your revenue because you have more distribution, you have more inventory to sell, and you have more opportunities. So just take advantage of that. Final recommended strategy is just what I said. Cross-promote the podcast, monetize as much as possible, do a clip show, consider the live implications of doing video content, and just really take advantage of the fact that you have an opportunity to reach a different audience that you would have never reached in any other way. And again, the bulk inventory thing is a real big deal when it comes to just being able to sell those bulk packages. So I encourage you to take advantage of it. Again, these slides will be available to you LinkedIn plus through the emails. For those of you who are not great at the visual side of anything, but you're going to be okay on the camera gear side, I have a special discount through Podfest if you use the code PODFEST at awesomecreatoracademy.com for the YouTube Starter Kit. It's a lot of the visual assets in terms of your YouTube channel artwork and your thumbnails that you need in order to get those initial views and clicks and help people understand what your YouTube video is about. Unlike a podcast where you just have one piece of artwork to represent the entire podcast, every single YouTube video needs its own billboard essentially to promote that video and to get those views and clicks. And if you don't get that right with how competitive it is, it's really challenging. So this is a product that I made to serve the YouTube community, and I just wanted to give Podfest a special discount. So you can go to awesomecreatoracademy.com, use the code PODFEST on the YouTube Starter Kit, you get 20%. That is it, you guys. I'm going to be at Podfest for the remainder of the conference, so I'll be more than happy to answer all of your questions. We went a little bit over on time, but you see how much we had to unpack here? It was a lot. And I know it's intense. I know people have questions. I've used up all my time instead of having more time for Q&A, right?
Let's give him a hand though. Roberto.
Yep, thank you so much. I will literally, though, I will stand out in the hall after I pack up, and I will literally just stand there and answer your questions.